So welcome once again. My name is Rev Alice Reed, and I'm here to share with you our weekly nugget of wisdom and exploration and discovery. You might have noticed that our quote this morning was a quote from John Lewis, and it was a beautiful quote. And as most of you know, that civil rights leader John Lewis made his transition this week. And maybe some of you aren't aware that John Lewis is part of the Big Six civil rights leaders who led the marches in D.C. for equal voting rights in 1963 and were instrumental in leading the civil rights movements in the 60s. The Big Six were Martin Luther King, James Farmer, Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young, and of course John Lewis. And today I was so full this morning as I was watching the news on the East Coast in Alabama. I felt like it was symbolic of the movement that we've done as a civilization, as we've done as a country and a nation, because the procession for John Lewis and his funeral was being held on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And if you haven't seen the movie Selma, if you're not familiar, this was a march that happened in 1965, and it was very violent. At the age of 25, John Lewis crossed that very same bridge with his fellow black marchers, and alongside them were white supporters, and they were met with violence by state troopers. John Lewis himself sustained a fractured skull because he was beaten by troopers as they were trying to cross the bridge. So today, as his body moves across that bridge, he's met with support and with love and with openness and with great acceptance. And I'm sure the significance and the weight of that significance hasn't been lost on you. Our theme for July, which, by the way, was put together many, many months ago before anyone knew where we would be with world events, is Unchained Spirituality. And we've had many voices represented as we've been looking at this idea of unchained spirituality for the month of July, and this idea of freedom and taking it to a new level. In the first week, we had Elijah, who was speaking about the freedoms that we sometimes take for granted in our country, and gave us a perspective of those people who may not be having that same experience of freedom. And then in week 2, we brought you Reverend Ray Anderson, and he spoke about this idea that none of us are free until we're all free. Some big ideas that he shared. If you didn't get to see him, I really strongly recommend that you go back and watch his talk. It was chock full of wisdom and great processes and ideas, and so we're really grateful for Ray on that second week. And then last week, I talked about this idea that the truth will set us free, and we sort of dived into this idea of what exactly is truth, whose truth, and how do we know what is true. And so this week, I want to wrap it all up with this idea of liberating our philosophy. And the inspiration for this talk this week really came to me from a comment that Reverend Dr. David Alexander made on one of our webinars, where we were talking about our curriculum, and I was saying to him how challenged I am sometimes, because in our curriculum in the early days, many of the writers, the wisdom keepers of the day, were all white, and it didn't feel inclusive to me. And David was quick to say that in the hands of people of color, our philosophy has always been a philosophy of liberation, and that it's only in the hands of other people who might be experiencing more privilege, that our philosophy may not have felt like a philosophy of liberation. And so with that idea, that kernel idea, I wanted to sort of dive into the true liberating roots of our philosophy. And it may sound like something really complex, but it's really simple. That our philosophy is really a philosophy of wholeness. And then when we realize our wholeness, when we know our wholeness, that, in the depths of our beings, that we're all liberated. And that it's not about privilege. It's not about attaining things or, getting things. I know that it can seem that way. It can seem that way. When I think about our teaching, I think about the movement that it's made over the last 100 years. And I think I mentioned this earlier in the month, where our philosophy was really founded in a time of great turmoil. In the early 1900s, we experienced a lot of challenges with health. I mean, a simple infection that one catches today was deadly at the turn of the century. So our medical profession wasn't as all the things we take for granted today were just in the formation at the time. We had the Spanish flu in the 1916 to 1918. We had the Great Depression. We had a great upheaval in our country, and during that time, this teaching began to catch fire. And I think that what may have happened is that as people began to grab hold of this teaching, it was a grounding space where people could begin to get their footing again, where they could begin to get a sense of self-empowerment. And that really created a firm foundation for this teaching. And people were looking for things like health and wealth and relationships and careers and trying to get more centered in life. And all of that has happened over the last 60 years or so, especially in our country, as we moved into the 60s and our society began to open up to more voices, and we began to hear each other, and we began to know that there was a more global perspective to life. What I know about our world and the way it's been evolving is that what we experience out in the world is reflective of our beliefs and what we hold in consciousness. And so when we are experiencing something disturbing, something that might feel disruptive out in the outer world, it means that there's some kind of shift that's happening within us. I was playing with this idea of evolution, and I looked up the scientific, the scientific perspective of evolution, and they talked about how stress occurs when changes in the external and internal environment are interpreted by the organism as a threat to its homeostasis. Now, you know what homeostasis means, right? It's keeping things steady and the same. That is pretty much what I'm experiencing right now in our culture, where people are really struggling to keep things the same, that there's too much change happening, that there's a lot of stress with that, but maybe all that stress really is just that teasing out of some higher way that we want to be in our global community, in our national community, and even with ourselves. It's kind of activating change for us. And when we look at our philosophy in light of all this, what I know is that it's changing too. I think it was last week I talked about the fact that this really bold and beautiful vision of a world that works for everyone was not part of this philosophy when it first started. It was something that we brought into it about 15 years ago. And I don't think, when you hold a vision that's that big, when you begin to really espouse the words, I want a world that works for everyone, well, there's going to be some dissonance. There's going to be some interruption in the status quo, in the homeostasis, if you will, so that something greater can rise up. And I don't know about you, but that's certainly what we're experiencing right now. I think there was a time in our teaching when we may have strayed from that really big idea of consciousness creates, and we might have started to focus more on what we were creating. Right? It's because the highest idea is that our thoughts create a reality, and that we need to be interactive and co-creative with our minds as we create what it is that we experience in life, and that in fact that we have some responsibility there. And that's true. That's true no matter who you are, and that's true no matter what station of life you have. But if we only focus on what it is we want to create, as opposed to knowing that we are in this constant movement of creation with Source, then we can lose track of this really powerful, liberating philosophy that allows us to move and flex and evolve and grow and get clearer. Sometimes we can get more attached to the ends, right? What's that saying? The means justify the ends. Well, I want to say that it's really all about the means. It's about the process. It's about knowing that we are in this fluid movement with creation, and that we don't need to get stuck in what we think life needs to look like, that instead we should be able to allow ourselves to be open and fluid and to move with evolution. You know, I come from a 12-step background. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the recovery movement, there are 12 steps to it. That's why it's called the 12-step movement. And the 12th step is really powerful, that we continue to practice these principles in all our affairs. And then there's a second part of that where we talk about carrying the message to the alcoholic or the foodaholic or the gambler-aholic, to carry this message to those that are still stuck in whatever addiction or malady that they have. And so when I think about our movement, and I think about this, what clearly is a movement of consciousness outward, that this outward focus, sometimes it can be misconstrued as a outward focus to, instead of, you know, the principled teaching of staying with that highest idea inward. But I think that the outward focus, this evolution that we're beginning to experience in our philosophy and in our theology, is really a movement of us to begin to carry this message that we can exist in a world that works for everyone. That anyone can tap into this liberation philosophy that teaches us that the outer conditions are not the thing that we need to be attached to, but it is the inner territory where we create, and then we have this experience. And if we can liberate ourselves to a place of knowing that it's always fluid, that there's always movement in consciousness, that things are always changing, well, then we can really help to facilitate a world that works for everyone. And as we've said many a time from this platform over the last many months, the world doesn't work for everyone right now. And we'd like it to. So I think if we begin to see our philosophy as something that's really fluid and that there's an opportunity for us to really be of greater service to the planet and humanity by taking these principles out into the world, by not only practicing them but teaching them. Of course, that's what we've been doing, right? But now we're looking at calling out the things that don't reflect that liberation philosophy that can set anybody free, no matter what circumstance you find yourself in. You can find freedom. And that freedom comes through practicing, through our spiritual practices, through our amazing spiritual technology of what we call spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. That this teaching, it's time to unchain it. It's time to release it. It's time to practice it at a new level. A level that not only reaches out for a greater good for ourselves, but that once we're grounded in self-empowerment, once we're grounded in ourselves, then we can carry this message to others. That we can begin to practice this philosophy in a deeper, more holistic way. Because at the end of the day, my friends, we're all whole, perfect, and complete. And we realize a deeper freedom, a deeper wholeness when we can begin to not only realize that for ourselves, but that we can begin to help facilitate this for others. So if we talk about some piece of social justice, it's not because we're trying to be political. It's because we are beginning to disrupt something that isn't in alignment with this highest idea, so that something else can break free, something else can break through, and we can really be part of the solution. Really be part of creating a world that works for all. It might feel like a tall order. You might even be exhausted by some of the things that are going on around you. But what I know about you is that you're resilient. What I know about you is that you were born out of perfection and love, and that love wants to express by means of you in a unique way that is powerful and potent. And that you're not alone, and that we're in this together. So I hope you'll continue to join me as we explore this growing edge of our philosophy, which seems to be right in there with the growing edge of humanity and evolution. So join me in this spiritual mind treatment, this affirmative prayer, for that greater good and that liberation that is seeking to be known by each one of us. So I invite you to take a deep breath with me. And then if you're comfortable, close your eyes or lower your gaze. And know with me that indeed there is wholeness inherent in all life. It is a wholeness and a perfection that sometimes needs to be teased out, that it's not available to the naked eye. And I know for each one of us that we allow ourselves to align ourselves with the creative force of life that is always creating out of itself by means of each one of us. And I know for each one, as we continue to both move inward and outward, that we allow ourselves to be part of that movement of creation, the flexibility of manifestation, that the constant cycle of death and rebirth that creation seems to go through, I know that each one of us is completely aligned with that, and that there's wholeness in that as we allow ourselves to be one with it. As we allow ourselves to drop down into the loving arms of co-creation, trusting that evolution is moving towards the perfected whole, and that perfected whole doesn't look like one individual truth or viewpoint, that it's like a prism that has many expressions, and that each one of us continues to open to all those expressions so that we can be that place where love shows up, be that place where the loving arms of creation shows up. So I know for anyone within the sound of my voice that may be experiencing struggle, that we hold you, we love you, we hear you, we connect with you right now, even if we can't be together. And I trust that as we continue on this evolutionary, revolutionary path, that there is a divine wholeness inherent to all of it, and that each one allows themselves to drop down and open to a new possibility of something different, something maybe we couldn't have crafted with our own mortal mind. And so we trust the upheaval, and we trust the discordance, and we trust the disruptors, knowing that all of this has come up simply so that a greater good can be known by each one. And so in this moment, know that creation loves itself so much that it has created you exactly the way you are. And that everything you need, everything that I need, everything that each one of us needs is available. So we continue to say yes. Yes to love. Yes to freedom. Yes to wholeness. Yes to beauty. Knowing that that is truly the means. And it is not the means that justifies the end. It is the end that creates the means for a deeper walk with life. I simply surrender my heart to this greatest, highest idea, and I allow the law to carry my love out into creation, out into condition, out into the world, knowing that it must be made manifest. And it is with a grateful heart that we anchor this in that same power by saying together, and so it is.